Somewhere in America tonight, a man in his late 70s will walk into a restaurant with his family, and without thinking about it, without even knowing he's doing it, he will take the chair that faces the door. His grandkids think it's just one of Grandpa's quirks. It isn't a quirk. It's a discipline he learned in 1968, in a country most of the family has never seen, and he has performed it at every meal for more than 50 years. The war he came home from is ancient history. The habits never got the message. This is the file on the Vietnam habits that never went home, or rather, the ones that did and never left. Over the next 20 minutes, we're going through the strange, specific, and deeply human list of behaviors that followed a generation of American soldiers back from Southeast Asia. Why so many of them still eat like the meal might be interrupted. Why they know where every exit is in every room they've ever sat in. Why some of them went decades without wearing the underwear and socks this channel has already covered, and why a certain helicopter sound can move a man through time. And we'll start with the reason all of it stuck: a cruel piece of scheduling that made Vietnam different from every American war before it. If files like this are why you're here, a like and a subscribe genuinely help. Begin with the thing almost nobody thinks about: the trip home. In the Second World War, a soldier came home by ship. That sounds like a hardship, and it was slow. Weeks at sea, sometimes more, packed in with the same men he had fought beside. But those weeks did something no one fully appreciated at the time. They were a decompression chamber. Day after day on the water, a man was surrounded by the only people on earth who knew exactly what he had just lived through. They talked or they didn't, but they were together, and the war receded a little with every mile of ocean. By the time the gangplank came down, something had begun, only begun, to settle. Vietnam worked nothing like that. The American war in Vietnam ran on individual rotation. Every man had his own DEROS, his date of expected return from overseas, his own personal clock counting down 365 days. You didn't come home with your unit. You came home alone when your number came up on an airliner with strangers, and the timeline was brutal in a way that sounds invented, but is simply documented fact. A man could be on patrol in a war zone at the start of a week and standing in his mother's kitchen before the end of it. Hours, not weeks, separated the jungle from the dinner table. There was no ship. There was no decompression. There was a young man in a window seat somewhere over the Pacific, still carrying a year of finely tuned survival instincts, headed for a world that had no idea what to do with them. So, the instincts did the only thing instincts know how to do. They kept working. Feel the trip itself for a moment, because thousands of men lived some version of it. You are 20 years old. 3 days ago, you were on your last patrol, and part of you is still there listening. Now you're in a window seat on a chartered airliner, the men called it the Freedom Bird, climbing out of a war zone, and when the wheels leave the runway, the whole cabin erupts, men cheering the ground they're finally leaving. And then, veterans remember, a strange quiet settling in as everyone privately does the same arithmetic. It's over, and no one around me knows me. The man in the next seat is a stranger rotating home from a different unit, a different war than yours. 20-some hours later, you are standing in an American airport in a uniform that still smells faintly of the place you left, and the year that just rewired every reflex in your body has officially never happened. Dinner is at 6. Your mother made your favorite, and under the table your knee is bouncing, and your eyes have already found both exits. because 72 hours is long enough to fly across the Pacific, and nowhere near long enough for a nervous system to change wars. Hold that image, because every habit in this file makes sense once you understand it. The Army had spent a year, and in many cases the war had spent far longer, training a man's nervous system to survive a very specific environment. Nobody, at any point, trained it to stop. There was no unboot camp. There was no course at the end where they taught you how to stand down. The training just came home in the seat next to him, and it moved into the house, and in 10,000 small ways it stayed. Start with the habits this channel's own viewers taught us about. When we made our files on why grunts stopped wearing underwear and socks in Vietnam, something remarkable happened in the comments. Veterans, real ones, men now in their 70s and 80s, began confirming, one after another, not just that they ditched them in country, but that the habit had outlived the war by decades. Men wrote that they went years after coming home without wearing underwear again. One told us he still doesn't, more than 50 years later. Think about what that means. The rash and the rot of the wet country are half a century and half a world away. The reason for the habit is long gone. The habit doesn't care. The body learned something in 1968. Fabric that stays wet is the enemy, and the body never got the order rescinding it. That's the pattern, and once you see it everywhere in that generation. Watch a table of Vietnam combat veterans eat, and you may notice the meal doesn't last long. Many of them eat fast, really fast, and clean the plate every time, regardless of how much they liked it. The field logic is simple and absolute. In the bush, a meal was something that happened between emergencies. You ate when you could, as fast as you could, because you did not know when the next quiet 10 minutes was coming, and you finished everything because carrying it was expensive, and wasting it was unthinkable. That urgency was drilled in by a year of interrupted meals. Setting a fork down between bites is a peacetime luxury, and for some men, peacetime never quite got all the way in. Then there's the geometry, the habits of space. The chair facing the door is the famous one, and it's real, and it's everywhere in that generation. The corner table, the seat with the wall at your back, the pause at the entrance of a room that looks to anyone watching like an old man getting his bearings. It is not confusion, it is a sweep. Where are the exits? Who is here? What's out of place? In Vietnam, geometry was life. An ambush is nothing but geometry. A field of fire is nothing but geometry. And a man whose survival depended for a year on reading rooms, tree lines, and trails does not hand in that skill at the airport. Many veterans describe disliking crowds for the same reason. A crowd is a room you can't read, full of movement you can't track, with exits you can't reach. Nothing about that is irrational. It's an expert system with no off switch, running threat assessments at a grandchild's birthday party. The night has its own list. Ask the wives, and for 50 years it has usually been the wives who knew, and they'll tell you about the light sleeping. Men who wake fully, instantly, at a sound the house has made every night for 30 years. Men who came home and slept for years with something within arm's reach. And some of them will tell you, without drama, exactly what that something was. Men whose internal clock still runs on the old rhythm of the perimeter. 2 hours on, wake, check, settle, back down. In the bush, deep sleep was a thing you rationed, because the man who slept soundly through the wrong sound did not always get another night. The body kept the schedule. Decades of safe suburban nights have argued with that training, and in many houses The training is still winning, and movement, this one is subtle, and once you hear it, you'll never unsee it. Veterans of the infantry describe catching themselves on a sidewalk with friends, drifting apart, opening up space between themselves and the people they're walking with. Their children remember it from childhood without understanding it. Dad never let everyone bunch up. The rule underneath it is one of the oldest in the infantry, passed from sergeant to private in every war of the 20th century. Spread out, one burst, one grenade, gets you all. Add to that the habit of avoiding the obvious path, the shortcut, the trail, the natural line of drift, all the places where, in another life, the tripwire and the punji pit and the ambush lived, and the flinch some men still feel at a pile of debris on the shoulder of a highway, in a country where roadside debris is just litter. The feet learned where death lived, the feet remember. Then there are the ears. Every generation of veterans has its sounds, and for Vietnam the list is precise. Fireworks, of course. The 4th of July is famously complicated in veteran households, and the crack of a car backfiring. But the sound that defines the generation is a helicopter. Specifically for many of them, the deep percussive whop of a Huey's rotor, the two-bladed heartbeat that was the soundtrack of the entire war, the sound of arrival and rescue and resupply and extraction, the sound stitched into every memory a man made for a year. Veterans describe it the same way again and again. They don't just hear it. They're somewhere else for a second. It isn't always bad. For some men that sound carries rescue in it, the sound of going home. But it is never neutral. 50 years on, a traffic helicopter over a freeway can reach into a man's chest and turn a dial he didn't know was still connected. And one more, quieter than all the others, the hunter's instinct. More than one infantry veteran has described a strange discomfort back home in the woods of Michigan or Georgia. In the exact moment, a forest goes silent. Birds stop. Insects stop. To anyone else, it's nothing. A hawk passed over, probably. To a man who spent a year in the jungle, silence was the alarm. The jungle was never quiet unless something was moving through it, and the men whose ears learned that rule kept it. Half a century later, in perfectly safe American woods, the sudden hush still snaps some of them to attention, an instinct doing exactly what it was built to do, in a world that no longer needs it. And here is the part that belongs to the families, because for 50 years they have been the ones reading the signs. Vietnam veterans are famously the generation that didn't talk about it. Many came home to a country that didn't want to hear it, and simply closed the door on the subject for decades. Wives learned the war not from stories, but from habits. Which side of the bed he had to sleep on, the walks that always ended facing the street, the way he went still when the neighborhood went quiet. Children grew up inside rules they couldn't name. Don't run up behind Dad. Don't bunch up in doorways. Don't touch him to wake him. Call out first. And only understood them 20 years later, if ever. For a generation that wouldn't speak, the habits were the language. Every quirk in this file is a sentence from a story the man never told out loud. That's why the grandkids matter in this story. They're the first generation far enough from it to finally ask the question the wives and children learned not to. Grandpa, why do you always sit there? And veterans' families report, sometimes they're the only ones who get an answer. Now, the honest paragraph, the one this file owes the men in it. Some of what we've described tonight has a clinical name, and the men who carry the heaviest versions of it deserve every bit of help and respect this country can offer. If that's you or someone you love, the VA and the veterans organizations are there, and reaching out is not weakness. It's the same discipline that kept your platoon alive, pointed at yourself for once. But it would also be wrong, and the veterans themselves say this, to file every habit in this list under damage. A great deal of it is something simpler and, in its way, more remarkable. Competence that never received a stand-down order. The man facing the door is not always afraid. Often he is simply doing, superbly and forever, the thing he was trained to do. Reading the room, holding the perimeter, keeping his people covered, at an age when the only thing likely to threaten his family at dinner is the check. There's something worth sitting with in that. We spend a lot of time on this channel talking about the gear of the Vietnam War, the towels and the tomahawks, the crossbows and the C4, the things men carried, to borrow a phrase from the best book anyone wrote about it. But the deepest kit a soldier carries home doesn't ride in a duffel bag. It's installed. A year in the wet country rewired a generation's reflexes around one job, staying alive and keeping the man next to you alive. And that wiring proved more durable than the boots, the rifles, and in many cases the memories themselves. The Army issued all of it and took none of it back. Nobody ever stamped the paperwork that said, "You can stop now." So the next time you're at a restaurant and you notice an old man at the corner table, back to the wall, eyes doing one slow lap of the room before he settles, eating a little faster than he needs to in the chair that faces the door, understand what you might be looking at. Not an old man's quirk, a soldier's discipline, 50-some years old, and still reporting for duty. In the last war it will ever have to fight. An ordinary, peaceful American evening. Now it's your turn, because this file exists in the first place, thanks to the men in our comment section. It was veterans right here who told us the habits came home with them, and that's how this video got made. So, what habit followed you home? The chair? The sleep? The spacing on the sidewalk? The one we didn't think of? The comments below are the record now, and the best story down there has a real chance of becoming a future file. That's not a figure of speech. It has already happened on this channel. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. If this file was worth your time, leave a like. It pushes these stories in front of more people, including the families who never understood why Dad sat where he sat. And share it with someone who has a chair facing the doorman in their life. For more of what they didn't put in the textbooks, subscribe. The files keep coming. To the men who brought the war's discipline home and turned it into 50 years of quietly watching over their families. You can stand down now, but we understand why you won't. This one was for you.